All right. Hello, everyone. Glad to be here. It's actually a huge treat to be at Lattiverse London versus over the pond. Intimate setting, great conversation so far, so thanks for having me. Also such a treat to be hosting and moderating such a fantastic panel. AI, we are all talking about it. We're asking ourselves the questions, how should we be leveraging it? What tasks can we deploy to? What tools should we be buying? Tons of questions. But actually, if I think about it more honestly, I think HR has a bigger role to play. If you think about it, HR has to think through what boundaries do we need to put in place to make sure that our employees are operating safely? How do we protect our company IP? And lastly, how do we continue to innovate, but also through the lens of compliance? So this is a big role to play for all of us, and I'm very excited to kick it off with this panel today. And I'm going to get right into it. So let's start with, we all know that we are going to benefit from AI. But when we think about efficiency and productivity, what is the biggest outcome that your company is striving for in terms of people's strategy? And I'm actually going to start with you, Paul.
All right, thanks very much. Hi, I'm Paul Deoy. I'm the CEO of Investors in People. Nice to meet you all. I'm actually banned from talking about AI at home because apparently I'm an AI bore. I get an eye roll from my wife and two sons a minute, so I'm delighted to be in a room if people actually want to hear what I've got to say about it. So I think this is probably, I've been working nearly 40 years. This is potentially the biggest change that I've seen in my entire career. If the people like Mustafa Suleyman and Elon Musk are even half right, now, they might just be talking up AI to boost their investment in their companies because they're needing billions of pounds to make this happen. But even if they're even half right, this is going to transform all our lives in ways that we haven't never even imagined before. And it's really important for us in the UK because in the UK we have really low productivity. And what that means is the amount of value that each of us create in our working day is not as high as in other countries, which is why we've got wage stagnation. It's why we've got less real wages now than we had at the lifetime of the last Parliament. So if we want to create better public services, we want to create more well-paid jobs, want to create a more prosperous society, AI is potentially a massive tool in helping us to fix that, but it does come with a lot of inherent risks. So organisations absolutely need to embrace it, and I'm quite worried at the moment that many organisations I speak to, there's 1.2 million people in our community who are employed by an accredited organisation, and they're benchmarking themselves against the highest standards of people management, and even many of them are not really thinking about this strategically yet. And if we don't, we're going to get left behind. And someone described it to me as a bit like there's a boat leaving the harbour, and if you let the boat leave the harbour without you getting into it, very quickly, it only gets 200 metres for the harbour, and you're not going to be able to swim to catch it up with it, and you're never going to get on the boat. So we really need to start thinking about this now because it will transform our organisations and society. But if you don't lean into it early, you could easily get left behind.
Yeah, I completely agree with that. Productivity is one play, and then also creativity is another play. I'm going to hand the mic over to you, Jess.
Sure, thank you. I'll see if I can make the mic work, Tessa. Yeah, so great to see everybody, and I'm here today for TrueLayer. I was sharing with the panel. I've actually, in full disclosure, just been made redundant, so I'm actually not from TrueLayer, but that's where I'm going to talk from, and I'm delighted to be here. Super, super interesting topic, and as Tessa said, creativity for me. So love what you're saying, Danny, about like the seismic shift that AI offers for us, and TrueLayer is a business, it's an open banking fintech. So what they've recently done is a big resize because they're trying to achieve that hockey stick of delivery, and it speaks exactly to this challenge of productivity. What we've seen over the past year with AI is a massive demand from our employee base. There was a real push in terms of how do we put structure around people's access to AI. So we ran a trial of Gemini, which is one of the AI tools out there, and then people were using ChatGPT on the side and playing with all kinds of bits. And the bit, Tessa, you're talking about around creativity, what we did in the people team is we brought it to each offsite. We do quarterly offsites every quarter. and we bring it as a themed agenda and get people to do a bit of homework on what do you see out there, what can you hear, what can you see in our business, what do you personally think the opportunities might be, and we basically would run experimentation and play. And we had some people in the team who were naturally more creative and would just go out and try stuff, and then others who were sometimes a little bit more following. And sharing the lived examples of where people could put it into play just started creating light bulb moments of like, oh, shoot, I can put this script in there and change the tone of voice. If I ask the ChatGPT to say, can you deliver this in a tone of voice to a population of this size who need to understand it like this, who I want to say it within X amount of words, I want da-da-da-da, and then refine that message, or I want to analyze survey results of 1,500, subjective responses and figure out what are the key themes coming out of these that I should be honing in on. So lots of that, like we talked about it being in that creativity, like the work you would think of coming up with for someone coming into your team as an intern or a graduate, like what kind of work could you give to somebody who may not have the depth of experience that they would totally understand what you want, but they're going to get you 70 to 80% of the way there. And the real virtue of just having that conversation in the team was broadening our thinking and the creativity of like, oh, maybe there's an application over here. Oh, maybe if I chuck these tables in, I can have a look at what that might look like. And just playing with what's possible and sharing those examples meant that exponentially grew. And yeah, we had lots of fun speeding stuff up.
I love that example of how do you enable somebody who might be more junior in their career or lack of tenure, if you will, and getting them 70% there, which leads back to productivity. In the same vein of productivity, how do you think the structure of HR teams will evolve given this new efficiency play? And Sian, I'm going to actually throw this one to you.
Okay, well, I'm Sian Harrington, and I'm actually a business journalist, so I'm coming from a slightly different perspective here, but I've written about HR for, nearly 20 years. I run something called The People Space, which is about it's a free magazine online, and it's about the intersection between technology and humans in the people of work. I believe very passionately in a people-first approach using technology to augment. I also run the HR Leaders Club, as was mentioned earlier. So I'm coming with the perspective of speaking to a load of different HR people over a long time. So in terms of how I think it's going to affect HR, well, basically, it's not going to replace HR, I think. We can definitely say that. It will definitely augment HR. Different parts of HR will probably go. If we take that approach that John Boudreau, the academic, talks about of thinking of it as the different tasks rather than one job, there are tasks that HR will have removed that can be much easier done by AI. But I think there's so many benefits, and we haven't got room here, but what I think really will happen to HR is that your role will become, and we've heard this already this morning, so much more data orientated and also more of an ethics sort of governor, I would say. So I think in the future we will see ethics frameworks as being an absolutely core part of HR. And I know we'll probably start looking at that later. But so that's key. Data, I think if you're not understanding data and able to add the insights we talked about earlier today, then you've had it. Sorry, but you need to all get into data. Key there, also AI will help, not just in surfacing the information you require in order to create the insights that we heard from the people earlier on the board that you can present to them. But also AI can help you. Annette was talking about the 7 slides. Well, hey, AI can do some of that data visualization for you. AI can create tiny little nice videos so that you can show that information. So you'll become a storyteller. So I think data, if I was to say 3 roles effectively, data analyst, sort of ethics, champion ethics governance, and storyteller.
Great. You use the word augment, which I think is incredibly relevant. We talk about this all the time at Lattice. AI is going to augment us, but not necessarily replace us, especially people leaders. And so I would love to hear from some of you, how are you guys thinking about AI to empower managers, people leaders? And I actually am going to toss this question to all four of you, if that's okay. Danny, let's actually start with you.
Hey everyone, I'm Danny. I work at Greenhouse. I lead a team of customer success managers. Our goal is to make sure that our customers make the most of their investment in Greenhouse and see real value in their hiring processes improving. There's a couple of different things I can kind of talk about here. A big fan favorite of our customers and also internally at Greenhouse at the moment is a tool called BrightHire. So BrightHire is an interview intelligence platform that kind of records, transcribes, and summarizes. That's the key piece when it comes to AI. Summarizes a person's interview to allow kind of a hiring panel to have, I guess, a more objective view of how that candidate performed in the hiring process, rather than simply relying on one interviewer in a roundup owning the room and that being the only voice that's being heard. So that's been within our business for the past year or so. It's made a really, really big impact to both the speed of kind of moving the hiring process along, as well as the accuracy the quality of hire that we're seeing come out of the process the other side. I guess when it comes to Greenhouse, we're being really cautious and kind of considerate about the ways in which we're bringing in AI into the process. One of the most obvious ways that we're doing that is CV parsing or resume parsing. My American colleagues aren't in the room, so I can speak like a local, which is nice. But when it comes to CV parsing, we're able to anonymize things that may in the past have influenced or caused bias to be seen through the hiring process. So things like name, gender, any kind of educational institutions that were showing up in CVs, we can kind of remove that and allow interviewers and hiring managers to look purely at the qualifications of the person that's showing up. And I think the other thing that we're being really deliberate around is around take-home tests. So that resume CV anonymization is flowing through into take-home tests. We don't allow graders to see who it is that has submitted that assignment. And we had, I think last year we had roughly 400,000 take-home tests be anonymized. And we compare that to the kind of similar data set from the previous year. And pass-through rates improved by about 10%. So it's a very small window, but it's that window, that 10% is showing us a window of bias where previously there may have been parts of the process that didn't allow candidates to kind of fulfill their potential through the rounds, and now we're able to mitigate against that, and it's proven really, really valuable both for us and for our customer base.
Cool. Sean, over to you. Same question.
AI will get rid of managers, won't it? Right? Yeah. Well, I think wrong, but that's actually what a CHRO of a global company told me recently. So that's quite interesting. But I guess a couple of interesting things to think about here. I mean, first of all, I was at the a Gartner conference a couple of weeks ago, and they've just done some research, and they're showing that CEOs are expecting a 17% productivity gain from AI. 17, that's pretty high. In fact, very, very high. And I think that, maybe they're a bit hopeful there, but they definitely do want productivity gains. So that's the first thing. The second thing is, when you talk to people, what do they always say? Oh, it's all good, except for the managers are holding it up. Oh, the managers are the people. I think managers get a bum rap, to be honest. It's always the manager that's blamed. So AI can really help the manager here. There's plenty of different ways, but I mean, one example might be AI can be like the talent scout, so coming a bit to what you were saying, but taking it into that talent marketplace idea. So if managers can quite easily see the visibility of candidates internally, people can put themselves forward for projects, can put themselves forward for new roles. You take a lot of that stuff out, then manager can be less about that day-to-day managing of talent, more about the developing part of the role, which is much more important for the people. You've got basic admin jobs that can be done, of course, but you've also got the real-time data, like people like Lattice can provide. And so you can surface issues a lot quicker within your team. If there's a productivity issue, if there's a burnout potential issue, can be surfaced quicker and in real time. So, the manager can then actually intervene and do something with that. And I think all in all, I see the manager moving away from management and that sort of day-to-day job of just keeping on top of people and moving more into a coach. And that's how I think we're going to see, and that's much more than bringing on the people side. Be much, really value adding, I think. So that's just a few thoughts on that one.
We're riffing at Lattice in terms of how the Lattice product and AI incorporating, and it's what resonates with me is what you just said is like, how do you make those people moments, those manager moments more meaningful? Take away the admin task, make the manager moments more meaningful. I'd love to hear from you as well, Paul.
Yeah, so the penny drop moment for me was I had 2 board papers to write and I had blocked out most of a day, and I was just starting to play with, it was Copilot, because we've got Microsoft 365, and I like Copilot because you can write anything in it, and it's not going to disappear anyway like you get with ChatGPT. Anyway, what would have taken me most of the day took me less than an hour, because, as somebody said earlier, it did 80% of it for me. Because I had domain knowledge, I just had to add the 20% in the editing, but it did 80% of the legwork, which would have taken the majority of my time. So that was when I thought, there is something really in this, and what's the application of this more widely? And I think managers need that help. There are 2.4 million accidental managers in the UK. Do you know what an accidental manager is? That's someone who's been promoted into a management job and never trained to be a manager. In the UK, we're really bad for that. We've also got a mental health crisis. We've also got more people leaving the labour market than entering it, so it's really hard to get good staff. We've got pressure on managers for productivity, for doing more than less. I don't think it's ever been a harder time to be a manager than it is now. And anything that we can give them that's going to give them the time to spend on the value-adding stuff that Sian talked about is the relationship with their employee, because the majority of people don't leave jobs, they leave bosses. And if you can create really high-quality managers who can spend time having quality conversations, that is going to be a key driver for productivity, a key driver for employee well-being, and a key driver for organisational success. So I think potentially AI is a game changer for managers, but we have to invest in them in order to make sure that they can use it well so that they can look after their staff better. It's a bit like when you're on a plane, when they tell you you've got to put your mask on first before you can help anybody else. We don't do that in organisations. Managers tend to come last. So if you put them first, they'll have a better chance of looking after your employees. That has to happen with AI as well. We have to skill them up and give them the support so they can use it in a constructive way. If we don't, we'll not get the full benefit of it.
Love that. I'm like still riffing in my head. How do you make managers more meaningful? So I love that. Love that. And then Jess, why don't you take us home?
So those answers were so great. I cannot remember the original question anymore. Remind me what we need to answer.
So we know that AI is going to augment us, but what does this mean for a people manager? How can a people manager leverage AI to be more meaningful?
Yeah, I definitely think it's back to that sense of experimenting. I agree, I'm nodding furiously with everything that each of you have just said. I think that challenge you described of these accidental managers coming to play, we talk about, and the idea that they get left as kind of the orphans potentially of the business. I would argue that the HR or the people function, I've also heard that comment around our function, that we tend to focus out into our business of how do we support the business and enable them, and less into how do we support ourselves. So arguably, I would say we also have to turn that lens back to ourselves of how do we ensure that we are actually enabling and activating as best we can as we go to support those managers. I think where I see the value for managers in what AI can deliver is that it does a lot of the work that if you read a management book, you can figure out. Like, it does a lot of the work that if someone had the training, it's going to help you get to that point. So when we talk about the 70, 80% of the way along the road, it's like, if you had the time and the resources to go out and train all of your managers and, 101 management training, and they all got that kind of sheep dip place, that is what the AI value will deliver. So if you're a manager confronted with a situation and you put that situation into your AI chatbot, it will deliver a solution of that scenario, which is arguably going to be as decent quality as your 101 management training. So I would say it's that delivery at point of need stuff that gets you 70, 80% of the way. It's not necessarily going to get you as high quality, I would argue, as if you go and talk to your people partner, who's probably a bit more nuanced and knows your organization and can speak to your culture and deliver that less from a vanilla application to like, what does it mean in our company and our culture, knowing these people and the readiness of who's in the room and what's really going to make the difference. But it's going to get them an awful long way along the road. And I mean, my personal experience of trying to support that management development is a lot of what stands in the way of people often even coming to the HR or the people function is this intimidation of, I thought I was supposed to know these things. They don't always have the confidence to come and ask the questions for asking for help. And I'd say AI can almost be that secret aid on the side of like, I don't know how to do this thing, help me out, and it gets them the part of the way there. And why should they know those things if we have never trained them, if the organisation has never served them? But I think there's a massive level up that's immediately available out of it.
I think anyone that's in the room that has ever worked for me or works for me now knows that I am such a believer that frontline leaders, frontline managers are our highest point of leverage at any organization. And so to have a coach, to have an assist, to be able to get them the enablement they need just it's brilliant. So I do want to recognize we're talking a lot about the value of AI, but everyone's on their own journey in terms of enablement, introduction, et cetera. What advice would you give somebody in the room that may be more hesitant in terms of implementing AI in their people strategy? And Sean, I'm actually going to start with you.
Okay, well, I couldn't agree more, Jess, than you've got to just get out there and experiment. I mean, you can't, and you said you can't let the ship sail. I feel that HR is not on that ship at the moment, on the whole. So I guess you've got experiment in a low-risk-ish area that adds value, then learn, rinse, repeat. What I would suggest is a very simple, perhaps, starting point is, and I can't, hopefully you can visualize this, but if you had like an axis with an X and a Y, and then on the X you had risk, and on the Y you had value, and you sort of plot roles within that. So if we went for a low risk, low value, so bottom quarter here, quadrant here, yes, you can quite easily do that. That might be a job like a sort of general data entry, which, as we've talked about, AI can do that. But actually, the cost of doing the AI for the value you're going to get there may not be worth it as a starting point. And then if you go to maybe higher risk, lowish value, sorry, I shouldn't be saying that as somebody who does marketing as well, but you might say something like a brand campaign, a marketing creative side of marketing. So generative AI could work really well in helping you to get some messaging and whatever, but the real creativity and your reputation comes on that human bit. So you might say, don't want to do that because that's quite high risk. If you get it wrong, your reputation could be really affected. And then if you go upwards to the high risk, high value, just something like really complex legal judgment, I mean, you just wouldn't want to start there. You just wouldn't, that would be a really terrible place. So if your best place is probably to look at what would be a lowish risk, but high value, because you are investing money in this. I mean, we've been talking about some of the freer items like Copilot or ChatGPT, but if we're talking about more serious AI investment. So I would suggest if you plot some roles there, so in the high value, lower risk, in my opinion, would be what you've been talking about with the CV work. I mean, you still need to have oversight, but it would be your self-service, very personalized offer that you can scale in real time and scale very much. And you're going to get good added value there because you are taking the drudge away, but you're releasing you to do that really higher value work. So that's my sort of trying to visualize it. Simple starting point. If I could just add, there's a very, very interesting new research that actually surfaced at the Gartner conference as well. They've talked to people who've been doing AI for a while now in HR, and they created this, came up with this zone of productivity. And it's a similar sort of idea, but instead of the value risk, they look at experience in a role. And there's a zone of productivity that goes up like this. So, for example, there's no point in really investing a lot of money in AI that helps someone who's really already very experienced. So a good example would be if they were a less experienced coder and you enabled them to do AI, they might miss something because they're less experienced. So you might think I'll get them very quickly up to the top, but they might miss. And there's actually an example going through, I think, legal in America now, where a product was nearly rolled out, and then it was discovered that there was a simple coding error. Whereas if you went to a very highly experienced coder, invested AI with them, they'll get very quickly to that top element, much quicker, more productive, and then they've got the nuance, the understanding, the experience to say, hang on, I've just noticed there's this little mistake here, or we just need to check this. So that's another way of, a bit more sophisticated way of seeing it, but looking at experience versus the value.
Yeah, I think that's right. I'm cognizant of time, but I do want to make sure we talk about safety, compliance. How can HR and leadership encourage safeguard responsibilities while experimenting and or implementing AI?
Yeah, I think we need to be really careful about that because, man, I am not a techie person by any stretch of the imagination. But even I know that if you just let your people run riot with ChatGPT and they're maybe loading up files and all sorts, you just have no idea where that's going. So you need to have some very basic ground rules about what's okay and what's not okay and have some really clear policies on it. For me, that's level one. Don't go beyond that at all. Personally, in our company, we're using Copilot because it's contained all within our Microsoft license, and we know from Microsoft that it won't go anywhere. So that gives us more freedom to do more playing with it because it's within a contained space. So I could say a lot more, but I'm conscious you're on the clock here, but they would be my Janet and John, first two things. I wouldn't go any further than that unless you've got that basics in place.
Yeah, I would say that's this one. Yeah, that the piece we did before initiating at TrueLayer is worked cross-functionally. So our security ops, our GPGR specialists, compliance, legal, etc., are all in the room to align on what are the barriers, what are the limitations of what we're going to do or not do. So yes, had an enclosed environment, also had the flexibility to use some of the open tools, but then we limited the types of data that we'd put in. So no PII data, no confidential data. So arguably it was kind of more theoretical exercises of like, write me a script for this conversation or such and such, and having the kinds of ground rules in place was essential because it allowed people to play, but not cause any damage.
30 minutes flew by. As you can tell, this is a conversation that we should all continue to happen. I want to thank the panelists for your time and joining us today and sharing your expertise. Thank you.
Thank you so much, panelists. And I also had a few panelists come up to me from other sessions saying if you would like to connect with them directly and if you have any questions, I'm sure they would not mind if you reach out to them on LinkedIn or in person. What are the energy levels like? They seem really high. I think we need a dose of positivity in